You're listening to another episode of HC Daily, a daily devotional podcast that you can listen to at home or on the go. We believe that you can grow as much as you want to grow spiritually, and this podcast can be a part of your daily growth plan. So, whether you're watching on YouTube, listening on Spotify or your favorite podcast app, we're glad you're here. Now, let's join our hosts, Jeff Forester and Chris Zarbaugh, in the studio.
So, Jeff, many people who are listening, they probably know you personally. A lot of people don't. When I came on staff a year and a half ago, one of the things that I was surprised by is that you oftentimes feed the staff and grill.
Yeah.
So you're like, I refer to you as a grill master, and I also tell the staff often, hey, don't take this for granted, because I don't know of any other staff that does this. Right. So I guess my question is, what is one of your favorite things to grill and why?
Yeah. I think my favorite thing to grill would be, Chad and I like to make these pork tacos that have a avocado tomato salsa on it. We marinate it in this really great marinade for a couple of hours, and it just they turn out fantastic every time. It's honestly, I think it's super easy, but man, is it ever good. Yeah, so those are probably my favorite. My other favorite thing might be cedar planked smoked salmon. I love smoking salmon.
Yeah, and you've made both of those for the staff since I've been here, and they're both phenomenal.
Yeah.
In fact, as we're recording this, it's 11:23, and so I'm thinking right now, in fact, I'm like...
So if people hear some kind of rumbling, we know what that is, right?
Right, right, exactly.
Yeah. We've done a lot of fun things with the staff. We set up a big hot dog bar one time with a whole bunch of hot dog stations around the room, and we had people on staff go, "Oh, I'm not really a hot dog eater," or whatever, but we had one that was set up like buffalo wings, right? So it had the buffalo sauce and the cheese, and we made this relish that was made from celery and all that kind of stuff, and carrots. That was amazing. So it tasted like you're eating buffalo wings. We had another one that was one whole station that was built around Sonoran kind of flavors, and that was incredible. And then we did another one all around California flavors, phenomenal, with a basil crema, and it was just so good. So this staff that told me they didn't like hot dogs ate 84 hot dogs, and there were only like 20 people.
Yeah.
So these people ate for like 4 a piece. So whatever.
Yeah.
They were really good. So I like to do stuff like that with the staff. It's fun.
It's really great. It's actually something I've very much enjoyed since I've been here, and so just keep doing it.
Well, it's one of the things Jesus did, right? Jesus hung out, and they loved to sit around and have parties and eat and that kind of thing. And you wind up having great conversations and engaging with people when you're sitting around a table. And anytime you got smoke coming out of a grill or out of a smoker or something like that, people want to stand around and talk. It's good. So I love it. It's one of my favorite things. And it's so different from everything else I do, right? Everything else I do is so precise and all that kind of stuff. And it's really hard to be super precise when you're dealing with fire and food and meats and that kind of thing, So it's good.
That's very cool.
Anyways.
Well, today we're talking about another judge in the book of Judges, and this is the third one we're talking about, and his name is mentioned. In fact, his whole life is summarized only in one verse.
One verse.
Yeah, which is pretty incredible.
Judges 3:31. So, you've complained before that we read 40 verses at one time. Today's your day, man.
Yeah. So
it's one verse.
Yeah, so let me give context to that. So Jeff says, if we're going to read a passage and talk about this much, Jeff's like, well, let's read this and give it context, which I do value context. Yeah. But sometimes when it's, 40 verses, I'm like, dude, that's like 4 minutes of reading.
Yeah.
And we're not really talking about it. So that's for me, I just would rather focus on the verses. And so
it's just fun to read the Bible during your devotions, is what I think.
So again, let's get to the fun part of this. So Jeff then tells me that he likes God's word more than I do.
I love the Bible so much. And I get it. Some people don't.
There it is.
Some people don't. I understand that.
There it is.
So I'm trying to make room. So I thought, you've given me permission so many times to read. I thought maybe you would take the pleasure of reading this.
Well, I'll read this whole passage.
Yeah, if you could read the entire passage
this
for us.
This whole thing here is found in one verse. Thanks, Jeff.
Yeah.
You're so generous.
Well, you're a good reader.
Yeah. So it says this. Ehud was yesterday that we talked about, right?
Uh-huh.
So the first verse, or the only verse, says, after Ehud, Shamgar, son of Anath, rescued Israel. He once killed 600 Philistines with an ox goad. That's it.
That's it.
So really, it's mentioning another judge.
Yeah.
The Bible references Shamgar, and it says that he rescued Israel.
Mm-hmm.
And so what's interesting is that, like, again, we have the entire, summation in one verse about a man's life, his contribution toward the children of Israel. And it mentions that he saved Israel. It doesn't mention that he saved Israel on one occasion.
Right.
Right. But yet he's considered as one of the judges. So we are sort of left to assume that when they say save Israel, we take it as he was also in the line of Othniel or of Ehud. That, that for years and years under his reign, he rescued Israel away from paganism, away from, worshiping false idols, leading the children of Israel, just as his other judges have done before him. And yet it just says he saved Israel. And then it gives this one account, and it says he killed 600 Philistines with an ox goad. So we find later on that Samson's going to be doing something similar, right, with the jawbone of a donkey. Right. But this is an ox goad. So what is an ox goad?
So an ox goad was a really long stick. You might think of it sort of as a heavier spear. It'd have a flat iron piece on one end and a sharp point on the other. So they would use it to, move the oxen along. They'd poke the oxen in the rear end to get them to move, or maybe in the side to get them to turn with the sharp part. And then the flat part, they would use that to clean off the plows. So this really was a farming implement, is what it was. It would be like maybe in our day, he killed 600 Philistines with a rake. Right. Or a hoe, or a lawnmower, right? A weed whacker. He killed 600 guys with a weed whacker. That's kind of it. It was just such a common thing. And one of the reasons was they were surrounded. If you remember back at the beginning, we talked about how there were the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, the Jebusites. There were also the Amalekites and the Moabites. Right, so there's all these tribes,
and the termites,
yes, right. Yes. So, and all these other ites. And so they were surrounded by these guys. And what happened was, God would use different groups to come in and cause trouble whenever they were disobeying or they were rebelling against God. But the Philistines seemed to they were trouble for everybody. So the Philistines weren't really local people. They had come down from the Aegean Sea, which is up around Greece, and they were seafaring people. And then they were actually, historically, according to ancient Egyptian writings, they were cruising down the coast and just marauding. They were like pirates, is what they were, down the coast of Lebanon and Syria and Israel. And then they were on their way to try to conquer Egypt. And then the Egyptian kings, pharaohs, turned them back. Well, at that point now, they had left their homes. They didn't have anywhere to go, and they just settled in this southern area right up against the Mediterranean Sea. But they weren't really locals. So none of the other tribes really liked the Philistines either. And they were foreigners. They were kind of pirates kind of people. And but they were formidable fighters. And so here you have...
they were, in some cases, giants.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, this is where Goliath comes from later on, right? So, and he had 5 brothers, or 4 brothers, whatever. So in this situation, I think you find Shamgar is just out working in the plains. That's what he's doing. He's serving God where he's at, which I think is a big part of this lesson. Is we don't know anything about Shamgar as far as, like, with Othniel, we know that he had already won a great victory before. He was a warrior. But with Othniel, it looks like he's a farmer. He's just out there, but trying to get his ox to go in the right direction and keep his plow clean. And then, I don't know, maybe the Philistines were just marching down the road. They were maybe gathering for a battle or something like that. And he's like, oh, no. Right? And the Spirit of the Lord came on him.
Yeah, and so let's talk about the Spirit of the Lord coming on a person. So today we know, since Jesus Christ came, in fact, we just talked about this at Easter, God ceased to exist in the Holy of Holies. He now inhabits and dwells in every believer. We are now the temple, and the Holy Spirit is in us. Back then, the Spirit of the Lord would come upon a person, and they would do miraculous things. And so for one person to take out 600 people it has to be a supernatural indwelling. I think of
yeah.
every crazy movie that I've ever seen, you know, and 600 is a lot.
Yeah.
Right.
The only time you ever see something like this is like in a kung fu movie.
Right.
Right.
Right. And even that's usually not 600.
Right.
Kill Bill maybe.
Yeah.
But even that was only whatever.
I don't know.
So it was only 88. So anyway, the point is that here's actually a closer movie example. Remember the Matrix fighting off all those Agent Smiths?
Yeah. There you go.
Remember that scene?
Yes.
That was a good scene.
Yes, there you go.
And so they kept on multiplying.
Right.
And so, Neo has this supernatural ability, right? That sort of defied, the physics and everything. So good. That's good. Do that again.
No, I'm done. But you can just imagine, dude. He's just out working. He's got an ox goad in his hand. He's just out plowing his field. And for some reason, 600 Philistines are lining up to go do something bad.
Or maybe he charged them and he wasn't working, and maybe he was running toward them and then borrowed somebody else's ox goad and said, "This is good."
Perhaps.
Yeah.
All I know is that he took what he had. Right. That was it. He is deciding, I'm going to use what I've got to serve God.
Yeah.
And to fight these people. Now, the Hebrew word for ox goad literally means instrument of learning.
Oh, that's interesting.
Isn't that fantastic? So God definitely used Shamgar's ox goad to teach the Philistines a thing or two.
Yeah, for sure.
Right?
Sure.
That one guy surrendered to God can make a massive difference. Right?
You know what it reminds me of is that when Moses was in front of the burning bush, remember? And God gave Moses this incredible assignment and said, go before Pharaoh and ask him to let all the children of Israel go out of slavery. And Moses says, well, they will not believe me. And he has all these excuses, right? I'm slow of speech. I'm not a theologian.
Right.
He goes all the way through down the list. And he says, I'm not convincing. And then God asks Moses a question. And he says, what's in your hand, Moses?
Yeah.
And Moses says, well, it's just a staff, right? And it's very similar,
and God's
isn't
like,
it?
that's good enough.
Right. And he says, throw it down. And then, of course, God, commands it to become a snake. And this is something that, is shown, the power of God shown through something ordinary. So I think it was a message by Rick Warren, that I remember that asked the question, what's in your hand? And then the truth of that sermon was, God has a plan for what's in your hand.
Yeah.
And so it's just an encouragement to say, you may not have a spear, you may not have a sword, but God's going to use what you have.
Yeah.
And for a lot of us, we wish we had other things, and we could spend time complaining about what we don't have. And by the way, that's not just something physical.
Right.
That could be a talent.
Man, if I was rich, I would tithe.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
10% is 10%. It doesn't matter how rich you are.
Or if I was a great influencer in my speech.
Yeah.
Or if I
would tell millions of people about Jesus. How about just tell somebody about Jesus?
Right.
Yeah,
so just use what
I
God
wish I
gave
could
you.
help all the single moms in the world. How about help the single mom down the street?
Right.
And this is what I think. Here's a man in Shamgar who obeyed God. He defeated the enemy. He brought a great victory to his people, even though he had very limited resources. Right? We don't see him have anything else. We don't even see any oxen. That'd be impressive. Right. Paul Bunyan, his big blue ox, he didn't even have that. He just had an ox goad. And with limited resources, he says, I'm going to use what I have. And then the other thing that you see is he serves where he was. It doesn't seem like he's, packing up and going and fighting along the Jordan River. He's out in the plains near Philistia, right? And he just fights there. It's not like he's thinking, man, if I was a missionary somewhere else, or if I lived in a big city, or if I did he wasn't trying to complain or excuse himself for having limited resources. And then he just decided to serve God where he was. And then, this is the standard outline for Shamgar's life, but he did what he could.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And I think that's such a cool thing. Instead of complaining about not having a sword or spear, he just uses what he has, does what he can, right where he's at.
Yeah. And of course, we're assuming a lot of this, it's not really given to us.
Yeah. Well, you have one sentence, dude.
You have one sentence.
One sentence.
So,
God thought he was important enough to tell us about him.
That is exactly my point.
Yep.
Yeah, that's great. Because it's in here for a reason.
Yeah.
And he is a judge. And he also, fulfilled the terms of being a judge, his title, by saving and rescuing Israel. And that's no small feat in itself.
So he gives what he has to God, and God decides to use that. And again, I think one of the key elements, we mentioned this with Othniel, we underestimate what God can do with one person who's totally surrendered to him and saying, God, you can have what I have. You can use me where I'm at, and I'll do whatever you ask me to do. And the power of that person is so great that in this situation, one guy is able to defeat 600 enemies of God. Yeah. Can you imagine if we had a whole church full of thousands of Christians who realized the power, the sleeping giant that is sitting in our churches, of the Christians who realize if every one of us was sold out to God, we'd be driving away 600 enemies of God at a time. Yeah. Now, it wouldn't be physical, battles in the streets and, Sterling Heights. We're not, but right. it would be, it's a spiritual battle, the kind of impact we can make, drive the devil away from our family and friends, fight for their souls, the kind of impact we can make if we would just be completely sold out to him.
So a final thought could be, the question of that sermon so long ago, what is in your hand? Mm-hmm. And just to realize that God has a plan for what's in your hand.
That's great.
What he has given you, he is going to use. Right. And don't ever underestimate what God can do with what little we have.
That's right. It's fantastic.
Awesome. So tomorrow is?
We are talking about
Deborah,
the first woman judge in Israel. And she is one of the toughest, coolest, smartest, wisest prophets of God. Just incredible how she leads.
Yeah. And Deborah, we can go several days. We're going to try to cover it in one podcast.
Right. That's right. That's
All right. So hopefully we'll see you then.
Thank you for joining us today. If you enjoyed this podcast, please help us spread the word by liking this episode and sharing it on your social media platforms. Be sure to leave a comment and review, and don't forget to give us 5 stars. When you do, you help us reach even more people who need a daily devotional like HC Daily. If you'd like to hear more from Chris and Jeff, they're both teaching pastors at Heritage Church, located in Southeast Michigan. You can get more of their messages by clicking on the Messages tab at heritagechurch.com. Be sure to join us again soon for another episode of HC Daily.